And so there's many different forms of strength, and I think for that reason, you do want to be able to demonstrate your strength in some different ways.
And this is I think, the most interesting finding of the last decade in all of science.
Mobility means that I have the requisite base range of motion that all of my tissues should be able to have.
There's so many different attributes of strength. I mean, you'll even hear somebody say, hey, stay strong, when somebody's fighting an illness or somebody's has something happen in their life, they go through a divorce, someone will say strong, stay strong. There's so many different variations of strength and willpower and even just in terms of like gymnastics. Like, is a smaller gymnastics guy or girl who's holding themselves up on those rings, are they not as strong as I am? Like, I can't hold myself up like that. So they're demonstrating just a different level of strength. And then someone like a Usain Bolt, you might not think like that he's powerful, but that's one of the most powerful people to ever walk the face of the earth. Nobody has ever demonstrated to be able to produce more force than somebody like that. He's on the ground, less time than anybody in history because he's able to produce so much force. He's able to basically projectile himself through the air faster than anybody can fathom, right? And so there's many different forms of strength, and I think for that reason, you do want to be able to demonstrate your strength in some different ways. I mean, it would be nice to be able to bench squat, deadlift something because they have great value in terms of kind of like getting your money's worth type of thing. Those are kind of the exercises you're going to get the most bang for your buck out of. Not a lot has changed in fitness when it comes to that kind of thing. So you got a bench, you have a squat, you have a deadlift, you have an overhead press, you have a bent over row, you got pull-ups, you got push-ups, and then you kind of start running out of exercises that are super effective. Then from there, it's not that a clean and jerk is not effective. All those are super effective, but those are variations of squats, a clean and jerk and a snatch and the Olympic lifts and stuff. Those are all still, it just becomes a giant variation. And then there's machines, and they all have their place. But to answer the question very directly, yes, you should be strong in a bunch of different ways, and I think you should be able to demonstrate some strength through your upper body. You should be able to demonstrate some strength through your lower body. You might hear somebody say, like, you should be able to, like, hip hinge, or you should be able to, like, do, like, a knee bend. A knee bend's a squat. Hip hinge is a deadlift. Upper body strength demonstration could be pull-ups, it could be a bench press, it could be push-ups. But yeah, it is great to be able to demonstrate some sort of strength in all these different avenues. If you try to pursue towards one thing too heavily, whether it's to be leaner or whether it's to be stronger, then other things will fall apart. So if you're trying to be really, really strong, you're not going to be great at tying your shoes. If you're trying to get really, really super lean, you most likely will not be very strong. And then you try to find a happy medium between the two, and that's, I think, what most people are struggling with is, and most of the people in my world are struggling with. Yeah. They like being strong, but they don't want to be fat, or they don't even want to be like puffy. They want to be leaned out. They want to have the abs, and so they're like, man, how do I have abs and lift heavy? If it's kind of unnatural for you to have abs, if you have to really, really, really work at it, then for you to have abs, you are going to lose strength because you'll have to lose a significant amount of weight. And so it's hard to find that balance. Bench, squat, deadlift are going to be great because they're going to work so many different muscles at one time. Barbell exercises are amazing because they're barbell exercises, and barbell exercises are detrimental because they're barbell exercises. So bench, squat, and deadlift are amazing because you can use so much weight in them. And normally when I do like a strength training seminar, I'll say, who in the room has lifted 400 pounds? A couple hands will go up. I'll say 500 pounds, and eventually usually it stops at like 600 pounds. And I'll say, okay, what lift was that done in? And they'll say a deadlift. And I'll say, okay, does everybody kind of understand that like this is going to be one of the better ways that we can overload the body? Everybody kind of agrees so we can kind of move forward, because overloading the body is going to give us a great stimulus. It's going to help with bone density, going to help with increased muscle mass, going to give us the most bang for our buck. It's going to be really hard to get big and strong if all we're doing is like overhead squats. Overhead squats it's a great exercise. How much weight can you use in an overhead squat? Probably not that much. So if we're trying to actually add muscle mass, which by the way should be everyone's goal, I'll repeat that again, which by the way should be everyone's goal, because the muscle pays for the party. You don't have to look like me and be stuck together and have trouble scratching your own knee or something like that. You can have more mobility than that. You don't have to get that muscle bound. But it is important to have muscle because muscle is going to help shift your metabolism. It's going to help you to be able to eat more, for those of you that love to eat. And I see a lot of people spending, countless hours, on a row or countless hours on a treadmill or something like that. And those can be effective ways to burn some calories. But it's nice when your body is actually working for you and you're not a slave to your own body. When it comes to deadlifting, or when it comes to any of these lifts, but when it comes to a deadlift, it's like, let's just try to break it down a little bit. What do we need? Well, we need a strong grip. And in order to have a strong grip, you're going to need strong biceps and a strong forearm, because the body is so intelligent and so smart that if there's a weak link, your hands will no longer be able to hold on to it anymore.
Yeah.
Your biceps are like, even though you're not trying to curl the weight, you're trying to let your arms be extended as much as you can. Your body is going to say, this is not a good idea. You need to drop this. And same thing happens when your back rounds over. A lot of times your back will round over, and then the weights kind of go into your fingertips, and your body is just sending this message like, dude, you need to let go of that. Like, you're too rounded over. You're going to get hurt. And so you usually kind of drop the bar. The best way to get strong and the best way to improve on something like a deadlift is to only go to a technical limit. So you want to lift and you want to push it and you want to work hard, but you don't want to go so hard that you're failing all the time. You don't want to, you'll hear a bodybuilder say you want to go to failure and sometimes train through failure. And they'll do like spotted lifts. We don't really do that in powerlifting. In fact, a lot of great powerlifters, the best powerlifters I've ever seen, they'll go to do a lift and they'll pull on the weight and then they'll just kind of shake their head and they'll stop. And they might restart and they might lift it again, or they might even decrease the weight. And that's really hard to do because our ego gets in the way and we want to always lift more.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily about lifting more, it's about lifting better.
Yeah.
And the definition of like what powerlifting truly is you're trying to move throughout an entire range of motion while maintaining position. And when you start to see people do that in person, when you go to a powerlifting meet and you see a female do it with 400 pounds or 500 pounds, or you see a guy deadlift 700, 800, 900 pounds and their back is still flat, to me, it's like magical. You're like, this guy's and this girl's, these are geniuses. Because who else can figure out a way to organize their body in that fashion and be able to demonstrate that amount of strength and their ability to recruit that many muscle fibers at one time? It's just insane. And it doesn't always get enough credit. But the only way that those people are able to actually get anywhere is if they always are training to the absolute limit. They're not going to recover from their workouts. And this is where you and I line up really well with the sleep. I feel like I have powerlifted everything in my entire life. Powerlifting is you do a lift, you go at it really hard, and then you recover.
Right.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, sometimes 10 minutes in between sets. The harder the lift, the longer the rest is. When we're in competition, it starts out with the squat. And you have 3 attempts on a squat, 3 attempts on a bench, and 3 attempts on a deadlift. And depending on how big the competition is how long it will be until your next turn. It's almost always like 12 minutes in between each set that you do. Think about that. For some of your listeners, some of the people listening right now, to have 12 minutes in between a set, that's excessive. But that's what happens a lot of times in a powerlifting meet. It's because they want to see those athletes have the absolute best opportunity to make that weight again. So you're not going to be able to make the weight unless you're recovered. The recovery aspect of it, though, all starts with, because people ask me all the time, what do you do for recovery? What do you do for treatment? What do you do for this? I don't do much because I try to train the best that I possibly can. I try to train optimally. I find weights that are optimal and not maximal. That's the biggest issue, is people are lifting too heavy. So they think, I'm going to go to the gym. All right, Mark Bell said I need a deadlift. And so they're going to go to the gym and they're going to try 3 plates. And they're going to barely make 3 plates, and it's going to be really crappy for them. The next week, they're going to try it again. Next week, they're going to try it again. They're not allowing themselves any room to really make any progress because the body is only learning how to do the lift improperly, not really ever learning how to do it the right way. And so a great way to know what amount of weight you need on the bar, you should be able to talk to yourself while you're doing it. So if you're somebody that lifts around 300 pounds, try talking yourself through 225 and try 5 reps and say, okay, I'm going to try to keep my chest up. I'm going to try to keep my back flat. I'm going to try to keep my stomach tight. And I'm going to try to continue this form all the way up until I lock the weight out and all the way back down to the ground. And I'm going to do all 5 reps that way. And I'm going to have perfect reps on every single thing that I do for the day. That's how you want to strength train.
Unconventional training is really taking a fresh look at how to adapt the body, to the conditions of real world utilization. So durability, longevity, performance, all of these things. And I think at a certain point we got away from those fundamental principles and started going straight for aesthetics. Like, how can I build these muscles really strong by contracting them in really linear patterns on these fancy machines with weight stacks and all of these different ways that we've started to do it with, Arnold Schwarzenegger being our model. Let's get big or let's lose weight. And we're not really looking at, are we doing something that's healthy for the body? Is this actually helping performance? And I think unconventional training really was something I learned from all the pro athletes I started to come in contact with. Like the ones who were performing at their peak level realized that you can't get stronger just pushing a bench press. Like you have to adjust and you have to make adaptations. Even if you're a football player, there's never going to be a time where you have equal weight on your left hand and your right hand. And a lot of us think we're pretty strong. If you have a good bench, all right, put a 45-pound plate on one side and nothing on the other side, and then try to press it, and then see how strong you are. See how strong your core is at adapting to different weight conditions, which exactly mimic life. And I think knowing the MMA fighters who are in a constantly evolving environment, they couldn't train with these linear weight systems and these linear patterns. They had to go back, in some cases, to some of the older methodologies that used to train warriors and soldiers of the past, like the steel mace, the steel club, the kettlebells, which used to be dock weights in Russia that they would throw around, that allow you to move the body in kind of complex movement patterns with offset weight, which mimics, reality, mimics life, and also mimics how the body was trained to adapt. Back, if you're doing real world things and the body's making adaptations, that's really what we're designed to do. And these unconventional training methodologies more mimic a real world condition. And so assists with longevity, prevents muscle imbalances from developing that can really, short circuit your athletic abilities and career.
Let's talk about something that the first time I had the opportunity to use this tool was here at On at HQ a couple of years ago, which is the steel club. Right. So what's the story behind that?
The steel club and steel mace were adapted from ancient Persia, actually. And they mimicked, originally they were designed to mimic some of the weaponry that the Persian warrior elite were using, because they were using a mace in battle and using swords and things single-handedly like these clubs. And what they realized was that to train to be able to swing their lighter weapons faster, if they trained with heavier weapons and heavier tools in the similar movement patterns, then of course they would perform better when they had the lighter weapons to move. So they developed these training methodologies to strengthen the shoulder girdle in these areas where, imagine yourself swinging a mace or swinging, I guess the closest thing we have is a baseball, but that's a very singular motion, right? Like if you were a warrior and all you had was a baseball swing, you'd be really predictable.
Exactly.
So you have to swing from all angles, uppercuts, back cuts, straight up and down, all over the place, and really moving these tools in an intelligent way. And that's really where the mace and the club training developed, is how to get your shoulder and all of the finite muscles in your armpit and all of these things that you don't do with macro movements, and get to really strengthen those. And so obviously we don't have warriors swinging swords and stuff anymore, but we all do these different types of movements. Imagine a golf swing. Like if you're taking a golf swing, you're only really swinging from one side to the other. And of course you're going to develop muscle imbalances. Same with baseball, unless you're a great switch hitter, or if you're, the forehand to backhand in tennis. Like you want to pattern different movements and practice those, then the club is a great way to get these multi-directional reprogramming, of the other side of your body, and strengthen things in ways that you normally wouldn't be able to do. So they look kind of like giant juggling pins, and they're heavy. And I really, really highly recommend, especially anybody who's a golfer out there, get one of these steel clubs and do the swing the other way of your golf swing, and start working that side of your core muscles and that side of your hip snap and your legs, so that your body doesn't over time get so imbalanced that ultimately it breaks down. This is trying to restore muscular endurance, balance, longevity, durability. As for most of us, the amount of pleasure we get out of our bodies is going to be a factor of the amount of time we're able to use it with the amount of fun we have while it's going. And so we got to stay durable. We don't want to give this up. We don't want to be one of those people that used to be able to do the fun things and used to be able to play games with our kids or wherever, but we can't anymore because our body won't let us. And the corrective steps can start now in training. And the great thing too is these tools are fun to use because you're learning new skills. Like the Mace 360 is a really challenging skill where you're swinging the mace back and forth, and then you pattern the Mace 360. Then we get what's called the infinity flow, which is back behind your head, out, down in front of your body, back behind your head, down in front of your body. And it's swinging in this seemingly effortless motion. But then you get one of your friends to try, and it's like, how the heck did you do that? So it's really fun to learn these new skills and test your body to adapt to these different changing conditions.
Yeah, I mean, it was so humbling. The first time I did the Mace, the 360, I was blown away because I saw it and I'm like, oh, okay, piece of cake. No. It was definitely humbling, and it's a skill, you actually learn a skill. And plus there are muscles firing that have had no experience with anything.
They've been hibernating like a bear, and all of a sudden you wake them up like, oh, you're using me now. Here you are. Yeah.
But it's having these tools, and today, and also they look cool, as part of it too. They're pretty fun. And this is just another tool that you guys have. But so you got the steel clubs, steel maces. What's the mace? Tell everybody.
Yeah, the mace. So the mace is was traditionally called a gada, and it's from the same kind of origin, but it's a long steel shaft with a heavy weighted ball. So it's naturally one of the most offset levers that you have. Yeah. So by sheer nature, remember what I was saying about the bench press with a 45-pound plate on one side and nothing on the other. It's like that, but in a smaller, more portable version. You can't exactly swing around a barbell unless you're Hulk, But this allows you to utilize your core in almost every movement. And with all of these tools, you can get a complete body workout depending on the movement patterns that you do, but you're always working that compensation to deal with the fact that the weight is going to be on one side and there's going to be lightness on the other. Yeah. So even holding it straight, even just pressing it out in front of your body, you're adapting. The heavy side is trying to keep you, keep pushing forward and holding it up. And then the other side is trying to keep your body stable and trying to keep yourself in line. So a very simple movement becomes a complex pattern where your proprioceptors are firing the things that keep your balance, and everything is working at the same time. The small muscles in your feet are adapting and figuring out how to keep you in line. And so your whole body just gets lit up. Whereas if you're doing something simpler, maybe you're just isolating, like go back to one of those machines with a weight stack, they'll show you exactly the muscles that it's working. there'll be a little diagram and it'll be like, this one is pec and tricep, you're like, okay, great. That's not like that with unconventional training. Your whole body would be lit up from, the top of your head if you're holding the right head position and tucking your chin, to the pelvis that you're keeping in the right spot, all the way down to the small muscles in your feet that are grabbing onto the ground to keep you balanced. And so it's really lighting up your whole body and strengthening all of these fibers that keep our discs in line and keep our joints loose and mobile. So I really can't more highly at least recommend supplementing unconventional training in there, if nothing else for the durability, longevity, balance effect of it. And, I think you'll find too that some days, that's really what your body wants, is just to get in there and swing some of these ancient tools around and, get back to your more primal roots.
The idea here is that WOD is a shorthand for workout of the day. And when we used the word mobility workout of the day. First of all, is that the word mobility wasn't used at all. There was a reference to Eric Cressy, and I think he made a DVD called Magnificent Mobility a long time ago. And as a physical therapist, I mobilize tissues. And so what we found was that I wanted a word that didn't mean stretching, because stretching had really come to mean something else, right? And what I'll tell you today is that mobility is a word that's now been convoluted. It means like, it's like the word extreme or core, like, what are you doing? Work on mobility. I'm like, okay. So let me define mobility for us. First of all, mobility means that I have the requisite base range of motion that all of my tissues should be able to have. This means that the physiology, the structure and geometry of the body suggests what normal range of motion is for each of us. And what turns out is that if you go into the experts, American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons, American Academy of Family Practitioners, the physical therapists, Bible, Norkin, and Whites, if you look at all of these people who've studied range of motion, we have basically all agreed within a few degrees of what normal baseline function should look like in each joint, right? Joint based. So that's well and good. And in physical therapy school, I had to memorize all those things, right? Well, it turns out what no one had done for me was compare what my body should do with what I was doing when I squatted, what I was doing when I got into a pistol. So it turns out for the average person, we don't have to memorize those body range of motions because we have a language called push-up, air squat, squatting all the way down with your heels on the ground, getting into a lunge, running, putting your arms over your head effectively. And what's nice is that gives us real benchmarks around what we're supposed to be able to do in terms of just straight raw tissues, there's also this software component to it. And what we know is that, your practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes permanent. That's how your brain is wired. That's why we practice skills. That's why you did all those crazy skill drills, right, over and over again in sports, so that you could ingrain a pattern so that those neurons could literally wire together. The oligodendrocytes, those Schwann cells, would come in and lay the myelin in and reinforce that neural pattern so that it would be easier to do it. That's why habits are so hard to break. It's so difficult to wire together to create a habit. It's also even more difficult to fire and wire apart because we have to physically break down those myelin sheaths and create a new pathway. So mobility is not only do I have the joint capsule range of motion, or is my interstitial tissue, my interstitium, the fascia, does that slide, or my muscle stiff, right? But I also have this software that says, does my brain know how to put me into stable positions? Does my brain know how to organize the body and have the control that it needs? Which means that's 50% of the score is skill. That's why we teach fundamental movements to kids and then continue to build on them. So like I said, one of the things that we ask about is, as we're having this conversation about mobility, the one thing is, hey, can your tissues get there? And then do you have control of your tissues? And what we'll see is that when we look at skills, we want to make sure that skills and training leads to open positions, that those skills and abilities scale from kids to Olympic athletes, from children and youth athletes all the way up to my geriatric patients, that the principles are the same for our adaptive athletes as they are for my MMA fighters. It is the same principles. And when we suddenly can't derive consilience, when you're saying one thing and it doesn't jive with the principles of what I'm saying, someone has a problem in their thinking. Because what's happening now is that there are lots of ways to get to the end. We know that all roads lead to Rome, and it's okay to have styles. You're, the Swolger from On It. You're all about the, kettlebells, and great. And there's a lot of ways to be working on those, get you to those shapes and positions, but the principles and the physiology remains constant. The environmental considerations remain constant. We just turn them up, turn them down. So when you suddenly get to mobility, what we've found more and more now through the workout of the day is that, hey, we want position to be part of the conversation of the modern physical practice. And when I say physical practice, I'm not talking about just training for an hour. I'm talking about your physical practice starts when you go to bed and how well you sleep and how dense you sleep. That's part of your physical practice. what you do first thing in the morning and how you prime yourself, the foods you eat, how much non-exercise activity you have during the day, your ability to down-regulate, did you breathe hard, all of those things, and then we can talk about training, all of those things constitute your physical practice. But what we've tried to say is, hey, look, the issue is that a lot of times we can buffer poor positions for a long time until all of a sudden you're like, what do you mean I can't squat all the way down? What do you mean I can't put my arms over my head or take a full breath? What do you mean my shoulder comes forward in Kimura? And so what we've done then is said, hey, let's put position and value position as much as we value strength, as much as we value speed, as much as we value cardiorespiratory conditioning. And really, position is a hallmark of efficiency. And ultimately, the way we train and think is that we say, hey, look, here are your positions. You've got it. You're solid. We're working on it. It's a moving target. It changes day to day based on who you are and what's going on. But can you maintain that shape and position under load, under a little stress, when you're breathing hard, when you're going fast, when you got to do more than 5 in a row, right? What do you look like at the end of your 5K race? Do you look like at the beginning? Well, there's a really interesting diagnostic around your position. And what we've said forever is as long as you went faster, that was good enough. And now we know that that's short-term thinking. And so what we can really say is the skilled athlete can transfer the positions between sports, between training modalities faster and faster and faster. And suddenly what you have is what someone else, and I'm blanking on the name, calls repetition without repetition. And that's it. So that I never, when I'm snowboarding down some steep face, I never want to be thinking about my feet or my breathing. I want to be thinking about where the board's going, what's coming next, the inputs. I got to get back to no mind. But that's why training is so important and why we need to sometimes take the high intensity out now because we're here and put the skill and mindfulness back in.
Stop telling people just to walk more, period. Instead, I'll try to approach like you can actually get more done in many cases if you choose to walk, because walking, well, let's go with first, like why it's a nutrient dense movement. It really uses a lot of your body. It loads the bones, right? So like if you were to compare it to cycling, for example, walking, you are weight bearing on your body. Where cycling, you're not. Your weight is really put upon your seat, which is put upon the frame, right? So it's you carrying your weight around. A good thing to do. So we talk about body weight exercise. Walking is a body weight exercise. It's where your limbs get to feel how much you move. They're also moving through a really big range of motion. Your arms are swinging front to back, much different than the computer position or even your arms affixed to a bicycle position, right? Where your arms are still sort of in the computer position. So you get this shoulder movement. Your legs are getting behind you perhaps for the first time that day. Like even if you're cycling, your thigh bone never goes behind you. Yes, it's moving a lot, but it's moving through a very narrow range of its potential. So walking, again, it moves a lot of body parts. And when you carry something too at the same time, there's a lot of core work, coordination, glute work that goes into walking. I mean, as simple as it is and as slow and boring as it can seem, your body doesn't feel that way. Your mind feels that way, but your body doesn't necessarily feel that way. Especially if you can figure out, like if walking hurts, and there's different ranges of ability, but if walking is bugging you in your knees or your hips or your feet, you want to sort that out, because for this other reason, why I recommend walking really facilitates lots of experiences and transportation. Like getting from point A to point B is a thing that humans do, like moving around. And it's kind of hard to explain it now, because we've become so car centric recently that unless you are a walker, which I am a walker, meaning I choose that as transportation, you don't really realize that we've given up most of the walkways for carways. I mean, I've been walking and hanging off the side of a freeway before because there's no other way to get to a place anymore without a car, without a motorized transportation. And so it's just one of the reasons that people don't move, it has a lot to do with their economical reasons, because time and economical reasons really go hand in hand. This exercise, move more, requires oftentimes that you have free time. And so what they really understand is a lot of people don't have free time. And so if you use an economical model, which is, it's called sloth. Have you ever heard of it? So it says that humans are really, and it's an American model, I believe. You're spending your time sleeping, leisure, occupation, travel, and home. That's the times that you're in, and they all relate sort of to the economy of your time, but also that's relating to the overall economy of how much you're having to work, to survive, really, financially. So transportation is one of those places that it's very easy to add movement to getting to some other place where you need to do a task. So walking and even cycling, if you can't walk, or other forms of rolling, allow you to add more movement into the transportation time, which, because everything is sort of parsed and separated now, we spend a lot of time getting to a place to do a thing, right? Like, how much of your time is not doing a thing, but getting to a place to do the thing? Like, economically, it's a huge wasted period of time. We try to fill it with podcasts, to better yourself for learning. Thanks everyone for listening. And then, you try to fill it, maybe some reading, maybe some talking, maybe some relaxing, but movement can go in there too. So this idea that active transport is a way that can really be a viable solution, and walking, to be such a whole body one, requires no gear, has pretty low carbon footprint. It's got actual footprints, that's why I'm in favor of it. I'm not going to tell you to do it, but I am going to tell you all of the benefits that come from doing it and where it can fit in.
Yeah, I call them fluffy workouts. I mean, listen, I love the bench press. I mean, I still bench, and I still think it's a valuable exercise. But I think the problem that I have is so many people will get so pigeonholed into one training approach, and they don't start paying attention to how their body's moving, or the inefficiency, or, thinking, back squats aren't bad for you. They might be bad for you, but there's no reason why you can't squat or do a goblet squat. So I think it's important, if you can, to get an understanding. And this may sound complex, but like at my club here, everyone comes in and they go through a really basic screening. It's like a 10-minute screening. And in their warm up, we find out, how they're moving. And then we're able to kind of educate them a little bit on what exercises they need to be doing or not, if they're not working with a coach. If they're with a coach, they have nothing to worry about. But a lot of people out there aren't going to have that luxury. So my first ounce of advice is, start videoing yourself, like doing exercises. I don't think this is something that I always do, is I'll still to this day video myself doing kettlebell swings or squats. And, I might, show it to a trainer in your gym, or if it just doesn't feel right, our bodies are smart. Like, if you're sitting there squatting, your heels are raising up and your hips hurting you every day, like, it's probably the fact that you're either doing squats incorrectly, or your body hasn't earned that right for you to be squatting with the bar on your back, or whatever that might be. Yeah. So, I just think a lot of times people are just, they're so intrigued on the program. Oh, that's Ryan's program, give it to me. And they just start jumping into it and not realizing that, what Ryan's doing is good for Ryan. It might not be good for you.
I love that, man. The first time I've ever heard that, your body hasn't earned the right to do it. That's powerful. Really, really powerful.
And that's the problem. That's the problem with a lot of these group training components. And I'm not going to sit here and bash, CrossFit people. Someone asked me the other day, what do you think about CrossFit? And I was like, you know what? I've seen some good CrossFit boxes and I've seen some good coaches, but the problem that I have is when someone's coming into the gym that, has been sitting in a chair for the last 20 years, 10 hours a day. And now you have them doing jerks overhead, and they have no thoracic mobility, or they have no external rotation in their shoulders. And you have them doing an exercise that they have not earned the right to do. So I think there's still an easy way to give them that training effect that they're looking to. looking for, but there's no reason why they have to come into a one-size-fits-all exercise. I can get the same effect out of a med ball slam for someone that I would be doing with an Olympic barbell. Like, is it really going to matter? The answer is no, but a lot of fitness professionals out there want to own the process and like it's their methodology, like they created it. And I think as fitness professionals, we have to do a much better job of educating people. I think there's a lot of low-grade coaches out there, and it's making the jobs for us a little bit more difficult because we have to sit there and tell people, relax, let's take a step back, and so we can move forward. I think there's a time and place for everything. Again, these are boring answers right now, and I really apologize, but I think it depends on the individual. And I think if you have someone coming in, or let's take some of your listeners who might be, sleeping 5 hours a night or 4 hours a night, and they're under a lot of stress from work or relationships or not getting the nutrition that they want or that they need. I would say that muscle failure is probably the worst thing for them to do for themselves. I think it's going to be way too taxing on their central nervous system. I think they might feel great for the first week or so out of the gate, and they might be like, wow, I'm sweating and I feel awesome. But in time, they will, no doubt about it, start seeing a decline in their strength and in their energy. So I think it depends on the individual. I think for someone like myself who's pretty in tune with their body, do I train to muscle failure 365 days a year? Absolutely not. I might take a couple of blocks of my training or a few weeks of my training and decide to train to muscle failure, but I also understand that I have to scale off of that. So I think it really comes down to your body's really smart. And if you're coming into the gym on a day and you're not feeling great, whoever said you can't see good progress by going through the motions? And I think taking a little bit of an easier strength approach, I think this is something that, one of my favorite movies of all time is Rocky. I mean, how do you not love Rocky? But it was almost the worst movie ever for people when it came down to training because, they want to revert back success to the Rocky III training scene of him sprinting on the beach, him and Apollo, or climbing up the mountain in Rocky IV till he's literally falling down. And it's really set a bad precedent for people because they're under the assumption that unless they're killing themselves, they're not going to see progress. And I tell people now, Don, I hate training more than 15 minutes. And I'm like, well, train for 10. Well, am I going to see progress on that? I'm like, absolutely. If you don't train one day next year, but you train and break a sweat 10 minutes a day for 300 days, you don't think, of course you're going to see progress. You're going to sweat. Your body's going to feel better. You're going to be more active. So this assumption that you need 6 days a week at 90 minutes a clip, it's insane. You're going to see progress do something. You're going to see progress. Going to failure and taking the muscle to exhaustion is a very difficult thing to do. And yes, you might see a percentage increase on muscle stimulation, but the reality is it's probably going to be so minute that you're not going to see the difference at the end of the year, but your body's going to feel a lot different. So I would urge more people to kind of throttle back, get through the workouts with some confidence, feel really good, and then come back the next day with a high energy level.
A really simple thing that people could add into their daily world, which is like one of the principles that we break down, is just the value of getting your arms up over your head each day. So you're just getting like a pull-up bar in your house. Like, please, if you don't already have a pull-up bar, get a pull-up bar in your house. And I don't even care if you ever do a pull-up. A lot of girls can't do a pull-up. It's great, no problem. They're a lot better rock climbers typically because they're forced to use their lower body in order to climb. Whereas guys that can grunt through and muscle through and use their upper bodies, they end up lacking form. So I don't even care if you can do a pull-up. What I care about is that you get your arms up over your head and you just spend a little bit of time each day. In the book, I recommend 90 seconds total. So that could be like 15 seconds, 6 times or whatever. Hanging from that position. And you could think of it as you're doing that, you're literally restructuring the shape of your shoulder girdle, which a common tendency is to go into impingement if you're always hunching forward, cell phoning, carpal tunneling yourself, and computering and chairs and all that. So just that simple practice of just, get long, create that space in there, hang for a total of 60 to 90 seconds. Whatever you'll do is what I want you to do. If what you'll do is 10 seconds, 10 seconds. Like whatever you'll do, whatever bite is good for you. And within that, literally think of it as like, visualize yourself. It's like, imagine if you had a wet blanket and you left the wet blanket kind of like crumpled up, and it would start to kind of like fester and kind of get moldy and get all gross. You're like, oh, we might have to throw that blanket out. Like, that's not going to work. that's your lungs and your ribs and your intercostals and all this precious tissue if it's not being breathed and expanded and contracted with regularity. When you're doing that, that opening up, imagine what you're doing is it's like you're taking that wet blanket and you're exposing it to the sun and you're kind of lifting it out and kind of letting that air blow through it. Now all of a sudden that blanket's starting to heal. You know, and so by having that relationship of your shoulder girdle and your neck and your ribs and all that in a position that's, you know, most aligned, balanced, stacked, a really simple way to do that, like a shotgun approach, is just spend some time hanging each day. Another bullet point that would be supportive is recognizing, we were talking about, you know, your central nervous system, you know, and gaining a relationship with your spine and, you know, your neck and, you know, your whole body really. But a continuation of your central nervous system is your eyeballs. You know, so if you are staring into screens all day long, that's literally putting your nervous system, your autonomic nervous system, which I would say is a misnomer because your autonomic nervous system is continually responding to your environment that you're consciously choosing. So when you are staring in that myopic vision, what do you do if you are in that fight-flight state? What do you do if a lion comes into the room right now? You go, you focus in on it, right? Now we make action. So now we go in and we go through that whole, the adrenaline and the cortisols and all those things come online, get you ready to move, and then what do your eyes do once you've defeated the lion or made it away or go into like, you're in the savannah and you're kind of just like, oh, you're just taking it. You're probably not focusing in on a lion anymore. You're probably just kind of spacing out and saying like, whoa, man, that was crazy. Right? So your eyes, the continuation of your brain, your central nervous system, are continually feeding information back into your physiology, saying, okay, are we focused? Are we executive function? Fight, flight, make it happen? Or are we more in that panoramic vision where it's a calming, soothing, rest, digest, repair type state? So if you're staring into your phone all day and you're wondering why it's hard for you to wind down and go to sleep at night, well, you're essentially sending the signal to your brain, especially doing that right before you're going to bed. Think of it as like, you know, you're sending the signal to your brain that it's time to wake up. It's time to go into action. It's time to move. It's not time to be still. And so if you want to be calm, you're feeling stressed out, say before, and this I'll just compound one little like variable stack. If you're stressed out, you're going into a date with somebody you're nervous about, or a business thing, or anything of the sort, and you're feeling like, oh my God, like my shoulders are clenched up, and I feel like I'm clenching my jaw, and I'm just like, oh, I'm like panicking. Emphasize calming your eyes. Take the whole room in. You know, so when you walk in, utilize that panoramic vision by really feeling the whole room. You know, you could even visualize like, okay, what's the room feel like behind me? Do I have a memory of what's going on back there? Right? Like, can I kind of feel the people behind me? Can I really take, and anybody that's ever gone bow hunting, which I don't know people's beliefs around that, but whatever, the experience of hunting is really fascinating to have. Even if you don't ever actually kill an animal, just the experience of stalking an animal is one of the most unbelievable experiences, because your senses turn on in a way that will never happen in a Whole Foods. Right? Unless it was like there was some sniper came in and all of a sudden, poof, you're on, right? You know, so when you're out there hunting, you're hearing every little stick, every little twig breaking, wind, you're noticing the directionality of the wind because that's going to determine the smell from me. You're taking distances. Okay, cool, that's 20 yards, 30 yards, 40 yards, 50 yards. You know, so your physical, environmental, internal map of what's happening goes whoosh, and expands out, and you become the forest. So what is that at a neurological level? It's you coming alive. It's you engaging with your world.
I think this is the most fascinating research. I mean, you know, so I'm interested in all psychology, all neuroscience, and this is I think the most interesting finding of the last decade in all of science. And this is the insight that your muscles are basically an endocrine organ that secrete hormones into your bloodstream that affect every system of your body. And from a health point of view, you know, your muscles will secrete hormones and other proteins that are good, you know, that fight cancer cells and that are good for your heart health. You know, the things that we know typical why exercise is good for your health. But your muscles, they secrete chemicals and proteins when you exercise that are also really good for your brain health. And one of the first papers, you know, almost 10 years ago, that was published explaining that when you contract your muscles, they literally secrete these proteins into your bloodstream that make you resilient to stress and can protect you from depression. The scientists called them hope molecules. This idea that literally your muscles are manufacturing like antidepressant molecules. And the only way to get them into your bloodstream where they can then travel to your brain is you have to contract your muscles. Like that's it. But your muscles it's like a pharmacy in your muscles. And anything you do that contracts them, walking, hiking, running, dancing, weightlifting, like swimming, anything, you are going to be dumping hope molecules into your bloodstream that when they get to your brain, they work as an antidepressant. And they also help people recover from trauma. Like that's like a miracle. I mean, because of course it's wonderful when medications work for you, but for so many people, medications don't work or they don't do the full job in terms of helping with mental health. And the idea that your muscles could provide you with the equivalent of something like an antidepressant medication, like that is just, I think it's phenomenal.
Yeah.
So if you think about this like an anthropologist, and you go back to when humans first started to behave like modern humans, where we were living in groups and we started to hunt and gather and forage, that the way humans survived is they had to engage in a lot of physical labor. You had to go out and chase animals and scavenge for dead animals and collect all your berries and your fruit and your roots and all of that. That a couple 100,000 years ago, humans really had to become more physically involved in order to survive as a species. And what anthropologists believe now is that basically the modern human brain is a brain that has evolved and is adapted to find hard work rewarding, that's the only way humans could survive. There had to be a sense of pleasure and some kind of psychological benefit from using your body to do meaningful, hard things. And one of the ways that this expresses itself is the runner's high, which is so interesting. We think of the runner's high as like an endorphin rush that makes you feel good for running, but like why? Why would your brain produce chemicals that makes it feel good to run long distances? And the idea is that, well, that's an example of how the modern human brain is trying to reward us for engaging with life. That if you will get your heart rate up a little bit, you'll put in the effort that it might take to, say, hunt an animal or to feed your family, will make it feel good. And the neurochemical that seems to underlie the runner's high also helps us connect with others. And that's what I think is so interesting from, the anthropological or the psychological side, is that something like the runner's high, it doesn't only make it feel good to engage with life and work hard, but it makes you a more social version of yourself. So endocannabinoids, they reduce anxiety, they make you feel good, and they also enhance the pleasure we get from cooperating, from sharing. So like if I were to, get a big kill and bring it back, instead of just being like, I got my food, get your own food. No, it's going to feel better to share. I'm going to feel good about myself for contributing to my family and to my community. And that the runner's high is basically creating the neurochemistry of making you that version of a human being, the kind of a human being who's willing to do hard things and it feels good. And I want to be the kind of person who contributes to my community, and that's going to feel good too. Like that's amazing. And it's not just running. Like we know about it because people have studied it in runners, but that's the exercise high.
Yeah.
And it gets back to this idea that movement is how we engage with life. And so we need systems in our brain that reward us for engaging with life. And that, that functions not just like do physical things, but also be part of a community.
So there's a great concept in physical therapy called mechanotransduction, which is a fancy term that says I need mechanical input into my cells and tissues for those cells and tissues to be able to express normal function. That if I don't load my tendons will become weaker. Okay, that makes sense. We told women forever and ever, hey, look, you got to walk and take calcium. Well, it turns out walking wasn't enough pounding to uptake the calcium. You had to load. Then when you loaded, the bones were like, I know what this is. It's cueing to get stronger. Give me that calcium, right? One of our friends, Katy Bowman, who wrote a great book called Move Your DNA, which is fabulous, talks about this example of the orcas that have the tall fin. And when you take an orca whale and you put it in captivity, oftentimes that fin starts to droop. And what we can see, and it's called folded fin or floppy fin syndrome, and it's a great example of two things. One is that because we've changed the environment of the orca is now spending more time at the surface. And because it's not being supported by water, that fin, not just when it breathes and comes down, it has higher forces on it, right? But secondarily, so that's us sitting, flying, not moving, right? Not eating right, not sleeping, being a stress case, not being in loving relationships, not having a community, like all the things that are important. But now, because that orca isn't swimming very fast all the time, sprinting and hunting, there's no force pushing on that fin very often. And guess what happens? The collagen at the base of the fin starts to degrade because it's not exposed and it's not reinforcing itself under normal forces. And so it starts to fold over. So your SI joint is really the same thing as that folded fin syndrome. And then what we can begin to say is, well, what are the minimum requirements? Well, one of the first things you can do if you have back pain is to begin walking. And that might be 5 minutes at a time, 3 minutes at a time. The first thing we want to do is restore your function. You're not going to make yourself worse walking. In fact, you need to move your decongest the tissues, to put those loads in. And what we think is, what we're coming to understand is that 10,000 steps everyone's heard of before, that's our minimum therapeutic dose. As you know in your book, one of the easiest ways to get people to start sleeping again is to get them to move a little bit more during the day. So that if you're having a hard time sleeping, you have back pain, guess what? We're going to knock both those things out, and it's called walking. And that is what human beings are supposed to do. We're not supposed to drive to the mall and drive to the grocery store and drive, like we're supposed to walk. So see if you can't kick that up to 10,000 steps on a low day. And that means when you get home and you've only walked 8,000, you need to go for a walk before you go to bed. Get your steps in. And I can't tell you the power of that. And if you look at what's going on with Stan Efferding and Mark Bell and some of these amazing coaches, Joe Ken, strength coach for the Jaguars, what you'll see is they all have begun walking practices. They walk a little bit in the morning, they move around during the day, right? You're standing right now, which is the same thing as walking, right? Being active. And so what we want to do is start to say, okay, well, now we understand how that's an environmental pattern problem. And then we can say, well, what's the minimum dose? Because you don't need to squat 400 to have a healthy back. But I can tell you that the women in Africa who carry very large loads on their heads, right? They have the biggest discs in the group. They have the highest disc spaces, and it's counterintuitive. Because they load their spines all the time, their spines are solid and rock steady, and right? And I think one of the issues that we're going to confront, and especially as we're talking about chronic pain and the fact that some of us are really struggling to sleep and to feel good and to want to have like a high sex drive, et cetera, is that we need to get back to the principles that made us human. Yeah. And then we can start to say, this is the next. So if you pin me down, you're like, Kelly, I want elite performance. What am I going to do? I'm like, well, you should probably read a book on sleep. I have a friend who's written one. I'm telling you, that's the number one. And number two, you need to walk a little bit more during the day. And when we start to move around a little bit more during the day, we start to sleep, then we can have the next conversation about eating vegetables. And then we can have the next conversation about which coffee and how much fat you should put in there. And then the next conversation, should you swing kettlebell or deadlift? But let's get first principles first. And it's a shame that you and I are spending, this is like, you didn't want to lecture adults about sleeping. That wasn't your life dream as a child. Yeah. It wasn't my dream as a child to lecture people about posture. Yet it turns out we have to, because we suddenly find ourselves as strangers in a strange land, and the conditions that make us human. Look, here's a challenge for you. If you have a little kid at home and you have a Saturday, do everything your little kid does. Toddlers walk 2.5 miles a day on average. Toddlers, you do not walk 2.5 miles a day. Every time they get up and off the ground, do it. Every time they jump and land, do it. Every time they sprint somewhere, do it. You're going to be so cooked. And what you're going to realize is that you don't have to warm up as much. You don't have to activate your glutes as much. You don't have to do all of these mobilizations or skilled tissues or position transfer exercises, because you are maintaining and nourishing that normal range of motion and healthy tissues just by the fact that you're being a human being.
Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here to up-level your health today.
At the end of the study, they found that when individuals were well rested, they burned 55% more body fat just by getting more sleep. And so the question is, how does this happen?